Hi, Freddie. Nice to see you again.
Hey, Tara, how are you? How is everything?
I'm good, thank you. It's a lovely day in Sydney. How's the weather in Canberra?
Yeah, it's all right. It's all right. I mean, whenever it's a lovely day here, though, you don't appreciate it that much because what do? It's a lovely day. You go about uni as normal. Can't go to the beach, can't go for a swim. So it's all right. It's good, but, not exactly the best situation. I can't wait to be back in Sydney this weekend for a couple of days. Oh,
hmm
just clean that.
Uh, Excellent. Well, we've got a interesting agenda today. We're going to go through Syria and some of the terrible killings there. We're going to talk about the latest on Israel and Gaza. We're going to give an update on the latest phone call between Trump and Putin. And then finally, we'll end with the latest polls on Australian politics because the election, even though it hasn't been called yet, is nearing.
It is, and a lot has been happening with it as well, I would say. Lots of changes that have been predicted, but Labour should be feeling pretty happy, I would say. Happier than they were last week.
Happier than they were, yes.
Happier than they were. Not pretty happy, not confident in any sense of the word, but happier than they were. So let's get into that. So initially we're going to talk about Syria a bit.
Mm.
Obviously, we did an episode a while ago which went into the fall of the Assad regime and obviously how that had occurred over a really long period of time. Maybe we'll do a deeper dive into that at some point. But since Al-Jilani, who is now going by the name of al-Sharaa, um, is now in charge of Syria as an interim leader, they have been trying to consolidate the Syrian forces and really unify the country. But do you think that's been going well, or do you think, as of recent news, maybe there's a few issues they have to encounter first?
Well, first of all, can I ask, is this a rebranding, Val to a more politically correct name?
I mean, I think Al Jilani was a rebranding in itself. I think this was the nom de guerre. I don't know how to pronounce that, that he used while he was part of Al Qaeda and part of the rest of those forces that he led. So perhaps this is him reverting to who he truly is, which obviously he wants people to think is official political leader ready to move Syria into its next era, you could say.
Which makes sense, I think. But I think a lot of the killings, and I believe there's more than 1,000 people being killed because forces loyal to the Assads are fighting with the new government, and
I
that's what's
mean, as expected, after a regime has lasted for so long, there are still going to be small uprisings across the country in favor for people who are benefiting from that regime. So it'll be interesting to see how the al-Sharaa government continues to, you know, deal with that because at the moment they've sent their military into the regions to, silence the uprisings, and all of this has led to over 1,000 people dying. I think 800 civilians, 200 military men, and maybe 200 um, like ministers, something like this. Yeah, but just horrific, really, when everyone began to feel peace and a bit more security in their homes, and people made the decision to come back to Syria. And that's a one-time decision. Right, we talked about this once before in a different podcast that they were offered refugee status when they initially left Syria in the past. But if these Syrian citizens choose to go back to Syria, that refugee status is no longer applicable to return again to the country they'd been living in. So to be a Syrian person making this choice to go home and suddenly these killings start sprouting across the country, it must be a terrifying thing to think, did you make the wrong choice? Is it too early?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the assumption that everything will be okay when you go home, that's the hope.
Mm.
And I'm sure services and infrastructure are still pretty broken. So it must be a very challenging environment.
It is. And one more thing that I want to say about this. Oh, sorry, not the microphone. One more thing I wanted to say is that in the past, in Syrian history, to deal with uprisings of this sort, it's been very violent strategies, right? And obviously, as we've seen in the Assad regime, incredibly violent strategies. So, how does al-Sharaa navigate this? How does he come up with a whole new comprehensive policy to unify the country and completely redefine what it means to be a Syrian person? It's a massive, overwhelming task while still dealing with, the Kurdish forces and a bunch of other militant groups. So,
It's an overwhelming task, and it's also a task because they've got to get the economy moving so they can afford to repair infrastructure and do all that stuff. Because the fact is, the US is not going to be helping to fund that, and the
well, no, of
question
course, and even as they're dealing with Israel as well, like
and the,
advancing in their southern border. So,
the question is, will other members in the Middle East, Saudis or whoever else, or whoever else, the European Union, help in this sense? It'll be fascinating to see because, of course, again, it goes away from our attention, Syria, with all the other challenges happening in the world, right?
well, yeah, of course. Yeah, I think that Egypt and a lot of the other Middle Eastern powers at the moment are really still dealing with Israel and still dealing with Gaza and what to do with that situation and how to step up against it. And that makes a nice segue into obviously what's been happening in Gaza the past few days. So there was a ceasefire from I think it was like the 19th of January.
Hmm.
Um,
Maybe
yeah,
February. February.
February. Yeah. Sorry, I'm getting my dates mixed up. It's early. The 19th of February, and that has been tentatively in place with a lot of bombings still going on, but largely ceasefire has been enacted. And then both Hamas and the IDF didn't agree to further terms for the ceasefire to continue, and so it didn't progress. And so, Bibi Netanyahu, he made a statement yesterday saying that they will be stronger than ever before. And the missile attacks that have been since Tuesday, only since Tuesday, restarted, have already killed over 400 people. So if that's the rate of which people are dying at this point, it's a really terrifying space to be in. And I think there's going to be a lot more focus on that in coming weeks.
But I just get frustrated with Hamas, right? They had the peace agreement, the ceasefire. Why didn't they just hand over the rest of the hostages? Why does this go on and on? Maybe they're
Okay.
worried if they hand back all the hostages, they'll be attacked even
Well, you
more.
just answered your own question because I think it's very plain to see when Netanyahu speaks that he just wants all of Palestine completely destroyed and every single Palestinian person dead, because without them all being completely dead, there is always a risk one may turn and become a Hamas representative, even if they're not already. So he just wants the entire race gone. He wants genocide. He says we don't want the threat that is Gaza. Gaza is the threat. He started naming, not Hamas anymore. Gaza is the threat.
Mhm.
So it obviously they're going to be very strategic in how they deal with their hostages. And it was a fair system going forward. They were doing hostage exchanges. And yet Israel was still bombing and still like launching various more like subtle accidental offenses and killing people. So if you're gonna say who is really violating the terms of the ceasefire, like let's look at like the death toll, which is, as of right now, basically 50,000 Palestinian people have been killed since the strike from Hamas on Israel, which killed 1,000 people at the music festival. 50,000 people have been killed.
No, it's crazy. But somehow I feel like, it gives justification to Israel when there's still hostages there. And I feel like they should have given back all the hostages and taken the risk of that, right? Because then at least they'd have world opinion on their side. At the moment, they're perceived as, you know, not giving those hostages back and making the thing slow and difficult.
You know what I would say though? I'm going to interrupt you there and say that this is a similar argument that I heard from someone about Russia. Someone saying, oh, well, Ukraine provoked them. By doing what? By existing? Russia was always going to invade. They were always going to want to destroy this state that they never believed should exist in the first place. And it's a very similar narrative to the one that Israel has been putting forward for a long time.
Yeah, I know, but world opinion would have that the hostages are released as per the thing.
Well, I
So,
have a question for you though. World opinion says that this shouldn't be happening in Gaza, but is it happening and are people still dying every single day? World opinion is not as strong as you think it is. It does not have that large of an effect.
yeah, well, okay,
That's what the
well,
US thinks.
if they just keep the hostages and there's just bombing and death the whole time, right? It just continues for good. It's
But
never
they
going to stop.
were exchanging hostages. What are you
Yeah, but
saying they
they were
did
doing
wrong?
it very slowly, and they didn't exchange all the hostages.
You could say the exact same for Israel.
Well, really, I thought it was all working
They're
and in
prisoners.
progress. Did this first round not include all the hostages?
What even is that question? It's just that it was a slow process. And it was
Anyway,
just that they were meant to have further talks. You can't say anyway. We're having a conversation. Last week or the last 2 weeks, the ceasefire deal that was negotiated by Egypt and a few of those other powers, which you're very supportive of, the fact that they were negotiating this deal. Remember that you're supportive of that, said we have to come in and do talks. Round two of the ceasefire was to come in and talk and come to a further agreement on how to negotiate it. And neither side went to the talks to
okay,
negotiate. So if you're going to put blame, fine, put blame on Hamas, but Israel is just as at fault.
okay. So both sides are at fault. So it just continues ad nauseum, right? That's
Yeah. But one side has the fate of their people and the genocide of their people at stake, and one side has, I don't know, their fears of possible future terrorism and their will to, have hegemony in the region. You know what I mean?
I do, but it just goes on and on. It just I
It does
don't
go on
see
and on. But
any path forward.
yeah, I think that the people who are living and dying in Gaza right now and being forced to move from one side of the strip to the other at the whim of Bibi Netanyahu at every given day, they are the ones who are saying it's going on and on. They are the ones who are suffering,
Yeah, of
and you can
course.
barely make it through.
Hmm.
So it's all well and good to say that Hamas are entirely at fault, but they're both at fault.
Okay, so what's your recommendation as a strategy to resolve it?
Aha, nice. Okay, okay. Well, if
No,
if that's such a bad idea, then what's my recommendation? Because
well, I don't know. I mean, it's
my
rather fun.
recommendation is that one power doesn't want to commit fucking genocide of an entire ethnicity, an entire ethnic a social ethnic group. That's my recommendation. That's
Well, I don't
never
think they've
okay.
ever claimed they want to do that.
Okay, well, if Mossad, that's what they're called, yeah,
Mossad,
Mossad,
yes.
Mossad. If Mossad is so efficient at targeting individuals and they're one of the best intelligence services in the world, why can't they individually target each Hamas leader? If they're so good at their jobs that everyone claims them to be, and if they have US support, and they
Well, they
have
have
the
done a pretty
best
good job.
intelligence
They
services
have
in the
done a pretty
world,
good job of it, of all the former leadership, right, of Hamas.
yeah. But it's not a good job because they've killed 50,000 innocent people. So, if they're so good at all this, if the US can come in and kill a few important people, if they can kill Saddam Hussein, then Israel can come in and break down Hamas. They are choosing to cause genocide. They want this. It's not an accident. It's not a byproduct of trying to get rid of Hamas. They believe the entire society is just is inefficient to the functioning of Israel as a state.
Hmm.
So
Well,
they want to
Trump
get rid of it.
certainly wants everyone to leave, and his latest thing is he thought Syria might take the million refugees. This is how crazy it is, as if Syria can cope with a million refugees. Anyway, shall we move on from Israel and Gaza? All right, and so the latest phone call between Trump and Putin occurred yesterday. and it supposedly was a long call for an hour and a half or something, and not much was achieved. There was some talk of a ceasefire regarding attacking energy infrastructure, i.e., power plants and infrastructure of Ukraine. And in fact, the Ukrainians have also attacked some Russian power infrastructure. So that would be a good thing if that occurred. But it seems to me that Putin is just continuing to play for time and playing Trump in this whole regard. And the latest thing from this phone call that Trump had with Zelensky after this call was he said perhaps the US can take control of the Ukraine power infrastructure and therefore Russia won't attack it if the US has ownership of it. And I think the first response from Ukraine was they didn't see how that would work because, this is sovereign assets of
But now
Ukraine.
they virtually agreed to it. At
Are they
least of the power plant that is more directly in Russian hands. I think it's very close to being in Russian hands. Yeah, I think
Zaporizhzhia,
I
the
today
nuclear?
or yesterday Zelensky had a really positive phone call with Trump, saying
Okay.
that he'd definitely be open to that opportunity. I mean, yeah, they need to have an economic something
Incentive.
incentive, yeah, tying them to Ukraine. Otherwise, they're never going to get involved. So, and obviously, it's a nuclear power plant. That's something you don't want to mess around with. You don't want to be floating missiles near that. So, and I think it's one of Europe's strongest. So hopefully, the US
I,
can have a vested
I, I think
interest.
I think it's fascinating, Freddie, because Trump is now starting to understand the complexity of global politics.
Mm.
And the fact is, Russia doesn't want to resolve this. They invaded Ukraine. And the question is, will the US get tough with Russia in
I
order to get.
ask you what you just said? Russia doesn't want to resolve this. They invaded Ukraine. Don't you think the similarities between what's happening in Israel there and Palestine is so incredibly similar?
Yeah, maybe for
Anyway,
BP.
but
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, continue. Yeah,
Uh,
they don't want to resolve it. They want to fight.
so the question is, will the US start and do
They're
really
irrational.
um, severe tariffs and financial impacts on Russia, and have a huge boost to Ukrainian defenses, etc. I doubt it. I doubt it. But they could do. Who knows? But in the end, there's going to come a point when the Europeans, if this is not resolved, they're going to, like we've discussed before, extend the French nuclear umbrella to the edges of NATO and put troops on the ground to back up the Ukrainians.
Yeah,
Um,
and I mean the French are really in the only capacity to do that, though. I don't know if you've read much about the nuclear situation with the UK as well. They have just as many nuclear warheads, but they were made in deals with the US. So the US actually has some jurisdiction over these nuclear warheads.
yeah,
And Charles de Gaulle, when he was, like in charge of the project of developing France's nuclear capabilities, nuclear warhead capabilities, he decisively chose not to involve the US because he predicted a situation where the US could not be reliable. And oh, like, what a fantastic thing to think of, to be independent in that way at a time when no one could have predicted the US would be as volatile as it is today. But obviously, this is a huge playing card that France now has to defend all of Europe and, maybe make some kind of comprehensive military protection for the whole continent.
yeah, it's amazing. The French coming into their own and Charles de
Mhm.
Gaulle forward thinking. Uh, there. So, yes, it'll be fascinating to see over coming days and weeks what happens here. But Putin can't be trusted. Anything he signs, any agreement he signs, he breaks. And so that's the view of Macron and other people in Europe, right? So it'll be very fascinating there. Shall we turn to Australian politics?
Australian politics, yes. We like to do our little segment of Australian politics at the end of each one. It brings us down to earth, brings us back to our
So,
country. I mean, we
so,
are here as it is. So.
so for those who are not political aficionados, the election has not yet been called. but it's expected to be called very soon
I mean,
for.
it has to be called very soon because there has to be 33 days between when the election is called and when it happens, and the
Correct.
election must be held before April 19th.
Before May
May?
19th.
No, I think
Mhm.
it's April.
No, it's
Oh,
May 19th.
yeah, well, May wouldn't make it, April wouldn't make any sense
Because
anymore.
they're waiting for the budget. They're going to do the budget, I think, on March 23rd. And so after that, I think they'll call the election.
Okay.
So the good news for Albanese, his approval rating has risen to 46% of people approve of his performance. His disapproval rating has declined to 45%, so only 45% disapprove. That's lower than it was. On a two-party preferred basis, the two parties are now 47% each, a tie. And Dutton's disapproval rating has risen to 46% of people disapprove of what he's doing and 41% approve. So Dutton has fallen, Albanese has risen somewhat, and at the moment it would be a dead heat if an election was held.
Yeah. I'm interested. What do you think your reasons are for that change? Why do you think that's been
I,
happening?
I think several things. I think Albanese has been working hard. I think he was seen as a leader during the cyclone, and Dutton made a few missteps. He wasn't in Queensland when the cyclone was happening. He was at a
Obviously, that hilarious similarity to ScoMo,
fundraising
um,
dinner.
back in
Um,
the Black Black Summer when he went off to Hawaii in the
yes,
middle of the fire season, and then Dutton is seen holidaying in Vaucluse, in the nice suburbs of Sydney, while his very electorate is being completely in the line of fire of
uh,
Cyclone Alfred. So that was quite
that's right.
interesting.
It was. And I think the other reason, Freddie, is I think Gina Reinhardt and others who support the coalition talk about, and Clive Palmer, replicating Trump in terms of making Australia great. And I think as Trump becomes more and more unpopular, I think a little bit of that blows back on Dutton, a little bit in the same way that's happened in Canada with the Conservatives. The Conservative guy modelled himself on Trump, and he's dropped in the polls dramatically. And so now Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, is seen as the favourite when an election gets announced there. So I think a little bit of that's happening here because I think Australians are disturbed by these tariffs on steel and aluminium, and now the latest talk is tariffs on our pharmaceutical benefit scheme, the basis of Medicare and stuff. So, at the moment, I feel like Australia's been very weak on responding to US tariffs, which is probably a fair strategy because the steel and aluminium is not so significant. But if they were to put tariffs to attack our pharmaceutical benefit scheme, that's $28 billion. So
Yeah.
the country would need to respond to that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess Albo is still showing his fear, as he has been for most of the year, that he's scared to make any big moves because he's scared how they may affect his election chances. But I think they could only be positive at this point because I completely agree. This is definitely like the wind blowing from America. In a cost of living crisis, people are obviously not going to be happy with Trumpian policies. And I know as well that in Australia we have far lower approval ratings for Trump than obviously Trump has in America. We've often shown a dislike for Trump and the Trump agenda. So that is already playing not in their favor. And the more they lean into Trumpian politics, the more people begin to dislike them. And I don't know if they've made that connection yet, but it seems like a fairly simple one to make. So I would be careful if I was a Liberal Party. But obviously, I don't want them to be in power, so keep doing what you're doing.
But the challenge is, Freddie, the Dutton has a problem with women, and men on average prefer the coalition. The same thing you see around the world. This difference between the sexes on this thing.
Well,
So
I'm
just be
interested.
aware of
What
that
would
as
you
well.
say to all the young men, and all the men your age who are starting to bite back a bit at the woke agenda and about to vote for Trump? What would you say to them, like as a piece of advice?
Well, I think nobody's talking about the woke agenda now, and it would be dangerous for the Labor Party to talk about that. I don't think it should even be spoken
No,
about.
no, but I'm asking your opinion as someone who does vote for the left side of politics. As
I've voted for
uh,
both sides of politics in my life, both sides. But at the moment, I would vote for the Labor Party, yeah.
okay, as someone who's a left-leaning progressive individual who's not racist or homophobic, who's like a, middle-aged white man, what would you say to these voters who are beginning to push back against the system?
I would say look at the performance of the government and look at the economic indicators and what they've done and what is the proposal from the coalition. There's not a strong policy agenda.
Mm,
I would look at that. But the challenge is that's for the intelligentsia who really get into politics, right? The majority of people look at sound bites and they look at how they perceive people, and that's how they vote, right? Unfortunately.
little bit of a intellectual snob moment for you there. But I think that people are getting far more interested in politics than they have in the past and really invested. And someone's views are just as valid even if they don't read a certain
I
newspaper
agree.
every day of
I
the week.
agree.
But yeah, I don't know. I think it is a difficult thing because the plain facts are not often stated to the public. So how are they meant to keep track of who's doing better in economy and who's doing better in foreign policy?
Well,
Like
it's
which government, when
good.
everything is there's so much
I mean,
miscommunication.
the fundamental thing is, do people feel better off now than they did before, right? Now interest rates have started to come down a bit, and the Labor Party has a number of cost of living initiatives. I haven't seen much from the coalition yet. That's where the rubber hits the road on all this. We can talk about all the other things, but in the end, people vote with their hip pocket, right? How are they feeling financially? Who's best to lead the country into the future?
Look, I
Uh,
agree. I just wouldn't have made a Reagan reference, but I agree. But all right
um,
then, see where your politics lie. Interesting.
so, it'll be fascinating to see. An election will soon be called.
Very
All
soon.
right. And I think we are probably at time, Freddie.
Yeah, I think so too. We've got to get off to uni in a bit to learn a little bit more about this and then come and talk about stuff next week. But it's been great talking to you and it's been great, communicating with you, our listeners. We love you very much. Every single one of you. There are so many. So we'll be back soon for another episode next week. And yeah,
Thanks for listening.
thanks for
Bye.
listening. Bye.